l'aspettavano così?
Perché credo in quello che dico.
Questo e basta?
Sì.
Don Giussani ha generato un popolo e io faccio parte di questo popolo.
L'avvenimento in cui Dio entra nella nostra esistenza e tutti, colpiti da una curiosità, sospendono per un istante l'ora e guardano dalla parte da cui viene il grido.
Perché l'aspettavano così?
Perché credo in quello che dico.
Questo e basta?
Sì.
Don Giussani ha generato un popolo e io faccio parte di questo popolo.
L'avvenimento in cui Dio entra nella nostra esistenza e tutti, colpiti da una curiosità, sospendono per un istante l'ora e guardano dalla parte da cui viene il grido.
La civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Buongiorno a
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session. The Thread of Memory and the Flower of Hope is the title of this session. It is the last big session in this 43 edition of the meeting and is aimed to teach us something. To take again the thread of memory means giving back a face, a story and dignity to men and women that seem to have been swollen by the spiral of violence of the past. And above all, today, we want to recall the events and know that we can be surprised again and that we can flourish again, even in the most unhuman situations. And in this thread of memory, we can get some hope today in situations where we need to learn and speak aloud words such as liberty, sacrifice, love, forgiveness, mercy. We need to learn to share hatred and pain without having bad feelings towards it, and leaving space, leaving room to the possibility of a daily miracle. And to help us understand all this, we have these three friends on the stage, plus one more friend who couldn't make it to come here from Russia, but she will be connected through Zoom. I am very grateful to our guests, but I want to warn you that it's not going to be an easy kind of session. Don't expect sweetened, so to say, statements with a happy ending, such as in the exhibition that we organized at the meeting, Persons Despite Everything. We have to go through pain entirely and see the terrible reality in which the world, and in particular Ukraine, is today, to try and understand together what hope we can have. Without further ado, I will leave the floor immediately to the first of our speakers, Elena Zhemkova. Elena Zhemkova is the Executive Director of Memorial. Elena has been working for 35 years in Memorial, and she will tell us about it. She's from Odessa, and besides her job, she's also living a situation for which her family today has been displaced to Belgium, Poland, Portugal, Ukraine, and she is based in Russia. So the question for Elena is this: what is Memorial? What is its aim? Is there part of the society that supports it? And today we know that the Memorial was closed last December by the police forces from Moscow, and this is something that made us understand that something bad could have happened, and then it happened in this. So Memorial was closed, but does it continue its work today, and if yes, how?
Ну, прежде всего, я хотела бы...
First of all, let me thank you all for being here today in this session. I see a lot of solidarity in this, solidarity with what we do and with what we will do. Memorial is an organization that was established 35 years ago. It is a broad social movement for truth. The aim is to reach the truth and to fight in favor of historical truth, for the past truth. And at the same time, the aim is to condemn crimes and to rebuild the historical truth and give justice to the victims. I think it is important to mention some data. I will refer just to direct victims that the law on rehabilitation recognized. We're talking about 11 million people. And among these people, more than 1,200,000 were killed. And then there were victims of, they were shot, and there were victims of the famine in Ukraine, in Kazakhstan, and considering all their family members, this is a really big number of people. It seems that we're talking about a distant past, but below this ash there is a fire that is still burning, the burning of human pain, of offense, of injustice, and of crimes that have not been punished. We did a lot as we created an archive of museums. We also published books and organized exhibitions. In the data bank of victims of political persecutions, there's more than 3 million items, more than 3 million names, 3 million human destinies that have been reconstructed, but 3 million out of 11 only. And if we consider this, we clearly understand how little this is so far. It is fundamental to ask some questions. How can we see a concrete person behind these numbers? How can we be aware of the scope of what has happened? And we have to remember that for us in Memorial, history is measured according to persons. So persons are our unit of measurement. And there is the exhibition that we organized, and I'm sure that many of you could visit the exhibition. Well, this exhibition is a wonderful example of how a wonderful little human story, it's not really little, it's like having fragments of human destiny, and these fragments can be useful to explain what has happened, and they pose a fundamental question. In this exhibition, there is a tiny box. This box was made by a woman who lost her son in prison. This woman passed away, and this little box was preserved by her friend during the war. And this tiny box was built to pay tribute to the memory of his dead son. And of all these people, now we have no remains, but these little objects force us to think about what happened and to think about what is a family that is destroyed when our dear ones are lost, what it means to lose a son or a daughter. Is it possible to achieve justice in this situation? This is the task of Memorial, our collective task. We do not want to forget individuals, even considering the scope of the events in which they have been involved. We did a lot, indeed, but at the same time we did so little. We did very little, in fact. There are supporters, people that support our work, absolutely. There are people that think that what we do is totally useless. We have worked a lot, and the people around us do not appreciate the value of human life as they started killing again. So I understand this sense of terror. I am aware of it, but my approach is different. Is it possible to continue with this work? Yes, it is. And the fundamental thing is that it is necessary to continue. All of us together have to make an effort and understand that truth will emerge, and that the victims will have to obtain justice. Those responsible will have to pay for their consequences, and justice must be made for the victims. I think that this is even more important today than before. And there is one further thing that I believe is important. We've seen this in the exhibition, and our sessions have confirmed it. And I'm talking about the tragic memory of Soviet repressions. This is a common memory, a shared memory that we have, and it is a tragedy that unites us all. And that's why we talk about a European memory.
Grazie.
Thank you, Elena. I would like now to introduce another guest here, Irina Scerbakova. She is also from Memorial, and she is an expert in German studies. Her father was one of the greatest scholars who studied Vasily Grossman, whom we know very well, and many of you have read. And Irina has worked for many years in many different projects from Memorial. I would like to mention a couple of them and ask Irina if she can talk about them. One was a contest that was made for many years, Russia in the 20th century. It was reserved for students from secondary and high school. So all these young people from Russia and other countries from the former Soviet Union were invited to do research about the history of their town or their family, to dig out again this memory that they didn't know. And another initiative that Memorial carried out since the beginning was the public reading of the names of the victims. So here is the question. Today, we want to recover the memory of this past. And how can this help civil society? Was it useful to have these initiatives, or is it just a utopia to hope that in Russia we can have a civil society? Thank you. Thank you, Giovanna. And I would like to thank all the people that helped us, at least to show part of our work here. I would like to follow what Elena Zhemkova said. Over the last few years, we have worked on memory. Every person, each of us knows how difficult it can be to deal with memory. Memory is a very complex substance. We've had a really happy moment for all of us. If you remember, we've had the perestroika, and it started with the word glasnost, transparency. And that word, and with the slogan, truth over the past, with the conviction that we had to give birth again to our memory. Despite all the data that were mentioned by Elena Zhemkova, at the beginning of perestroika, there was memory that existed in a sort of hidden and secret way. And I'm talking about mass terror, mass repressions, and the memory of these events. And all of a sudden, this opportunity opened up for all of us. In fact, many people started wanting to know about the past. They want to remember the past. They want to find out what happened to their families, to their friends, to the country. Because we knew nothing about it. Even Solzhenitsyn, in the Gulag Archipelago book, he didn't really know what was left in the archive. Those archives could have been destroyed completely. So that book was written thanks to the memory that was preserved by concrete people. And all of a sudden, instead, at the time of the perestroika, there was this historical moment when so many people were longing for memory. They wanted to know truth. They understood that one cannot really go towards the future without knowing about their past. So we were going ahead with the new Russia that we wanted to build. Unfortunately, now we discuss a lot why we have reached this tragic moment that we have today. Because it seems that this attempt to rebuild truth has been interrupted. Perhaps in the past we saw the risk that this could have entailed if this happened, but our voice was too weak. We've tried to say what we wanted to say. In the 90s, our country had a very serious economic crisis, and people were dealing with so many problems. They were not interested in politics. They thought that everything would have been solved by the market or by itself. That's the situation in the 90s, and we were sure that the past would have never come back, that we had closed our story with Stalin, and so we didn't really need to have a state policy. We didn't really need specific programs in this respect. We thought that we didn't need projects or that the state had to work to rebuild this memory. But we saw what happened because historical relativism is now gaining ground. And we hear that historical truth may not exist. That's what we are told. So historical facts are called into question, and we have seen what all this may lead to. So with our projects, we try to explain the importance of remembering. We try to tell people how important it is to preserve a memory. And we've done this job. We started 25 years ago with scholars, and this was the aim of this work. And the contest that was organized with pupils was the people in the 20th century. And we wanted that young people could tap on the family memory, and we wanted them to listen to people that maybe never talked about their past. And we wanted that these young generations really understood what the past was about and how people used to live in those times, in those conditions, and the impact that terror had on them and the impact that terror had on society. And we managed to set up a big archive, including thousands and thousands of works from all over Russia, from all the regions of Russia. And this archive is a collection of memories, and these memories have been passed on from generation to generation. So did we do a lot or did we do little? That's what we asked ourselves before. And then the other initiative that was mentioned by Memorial, the public reading of the names of the victims that started more than 10 years ago. And how does it work? Basically, people meet up in Lubyanka Square, the very well-known square, around a stone that was brought there from the first lager, where the Gulag started, basically. And the people gather there, and that's on the 29th of October. And all day they read through the names of the people that were shot in Moscow. We're talking about 40,000 people. And over the last few years, we never managed to read all the names, even if we stayed there full days there reading. At the beginning, we thought that not many people would join, but now things have changed. That was just the beginning. Thousands and thousands of people joined, and they waited hours and hours just to read a couple of names. So we realized that this alive memory can work indeed. We saw that it is passed on from generation to generation, because in the square there weren't victims of terror. There were just maybe young people, very young people there just to read a couple of names. And then the last point I would like to mention is this. Sometimes it seems as if the people forgot about this tremendous memory, that they cancelled that, and it feels like Stalin is once again seen in a positive light by many people, and this means only one thing. It means that the state has defeated again the people. This is valid for many people at least. Despite this, I believe, along with many people that collaborate with Memorial and also other people that don't have any kind of relation with Memorial, I believe that what has been done, what has been written, and what has been told does not really circulate. Of course, there are dark times, but this does not mean that people disappear in these dark times. And this is our hope. This is the sense of the exhibition that we organized, and that's the sense of our gathering, our session here today.
Se mi permettete,
If you allow me to do so, I like to go back to things that our friend said. Elena Zhemkova said that this memory is also European memory. She said it at the end of her speech. And as a matter of fact, while we were preparing the setting up of this exhibition, Persons in Spite of All, I want to tell you how this exhibition was created. So there was a group of Italian students that were in Moscow to study at the end of last day, and they were so, happy and excited by the last exhibition organized by Memorial before it shut down. They said, we need to disseminate this exhibition also in Italy. And so who else could I ask for such initiative? So we're meeting. So they said immediately yes. And they decided to set it up. And it was great with such little notice. And it was really incredible. And so I must say that considering the work that has been done, well, we try to always assess the situation. So at the end of each day, we assess the whole day, and many people now worry about the future of Memorial because, well, you have somehow understood so much about this exhibition. How many people have cried in front of such an exhibition because it moves people so deeply. So you are Memorial because memory is heritage. Memory has to do not only with the past, but somehow as an influence on our consciousness. And then it is up to us to choose whether to somehow leave the past closed behind doors or decide to be people and decide to remember. So they have been quite modest, but actually they keep working. So Memorial is still alive with no physical premises, but Memorial keeps existing in the efforts, heart, and soul of these people. And we are immensely, immensely grateful to them for what they do. And we also feel being co-responsible and also liable for all that. So now we have our guest from Russia, Ol'ga Sedakova. And I ask you a big round of applause because Ol'ga Sedakova is a great friend of the meeting. She's one of the most important poetic voices of today's Russia, and she's also a great scholar of Dante Alighieri. Today in Russia, there are so many topics that are forbidden, and talking about Dante and share that knowledge with the people is a great reason to hope and to spread out memory. I remember Olga Lubyanka. I remember October 29th on Lubyanka Square, and she was there too in a queue to read a name of a shot soldier. Olga is not here on site with us, but she's with us on remote. And I'd like to ask her about culture, about these terrible injustice, that is war. So the boycott of Russian culture or boycotting Russia to core, does it make sense? Or is there a risk maybe to further increase the existing gap? Because there are people who are also trying to struggle for truth. They try to somehow do something. So is it possible, to find an us that can identify both us and Russian, and also maybe they can also identify Russians and Ukrainians, and maybe this is surreal what I'm saying. So is it possible to find an us that gets together the people who want to build bridges? Olga, the floor is yours. I'm very happy to be here with the meeting. I'm a dear friend of the meeting. I'd like to answer Giovanna's question. But I'd like maybe to somehow make a step back in time and Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, I had the chance to travel a lot and to meet a lot of people, many people who love Russia. And Russia is a deep and personal event in their lives. I met such people in the UK, in Denmark, in Sweden, in France, and of course in Italy. And I'm thinking about my dear old friends of the Christian Russia Association. So what do these people know about Russia? What do they know about Russia? All of these people. I'm not talking about a professional expert of Slavic culture. I mean, I think about people who love Russia but are no particular experts or professionals, but people who consider Russia very important to them. For instance, a banker or an Anglican a bishop or a nurse from Copenhagen, a German artist or a French poet. And they did not even know Russian because they were reading translations. Well, what did they know about Russia? They knew the so-called Russian culture. They loved the Russians thanks to the classical Russian culture, and I'm referring especially to the culture dating back to the 19th century and also the tragic 20th century. And through these encounters, I had the chance to experience what Georges Nivau, a scholar of Russian culture, said. That he said that this culture belongs to the whole world, and somehow it influences several languages and areas of society. So, but still it has some features, but sometimes it is easier from the outside to see such features, because from the inside you just see the differences and somehow the splitting points. And the current catastrophe, the current crisis started on February 24th. And I try to figure out what all these people are thinking. And I thought about the verses of Marina Tsvetaeva, some verses that had been written in 1939 when Germany invaded Czechoslovakia. Rosy-cheeked virgin among the Green Mountains, Germany, 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 shame. You have conquered half of Europe, astral soul. You once deceived us with your fairy tales. Now you send your panzers. And in particular, I was struck by these last verses because Tsvetaeva loved the German genius, and she talks about astral soul and fairy tales, and this shows her love for the German soul, the German culture. Well, in the case of Russian culture, the first words would have been different, but certainly the words astral soul and fairy tales would have not been used. Probably there would be other words, kindness, empathy, the importance of forgiveness, and similar topics. And I see that there is an immense difference between what we consider as Russian culture and what we consider as Russian soul, because the Russian culture comes from the Russian soul, so there is a huge gap existing. And also we see what Russia is doing currently. So it is perpetrating extremely brutal and inhuman war crimes. So how can we make these two things go hand in hand? I am also still shocked, and I understand that all this puts at stake the very same message of the Russian culture, and also questions ourselves about the idea of a Pacific Russian, my great friend and philosopher Vladimir Bibikin. And he said that Russia could start from scratch. But how can we make this go hand in hand with the idea of the so-called Russian world? Considering what the Russian world is doing in Ukraine, what can we do? How can we react? I've already said that when such topics are debated, there's a different conception of culture by sociologists or ethnologists. They think about what artists, directors, intellectuals from Russia did or said or wrote. It is self-evident that in such a situation, the topic of Russian culture is debated. And should Russian culture be boycotted or not? And I mean, there is also a debate inside Russia about the revision of Russian culture. Our intelligentsia addresses especially the latter. So the current situation somehow put at stake Russian culture, and according to many, Russian culture has been somehow diminished in importance. However, I want to say that Russian culture is not an accomplice of such barbarian acts whose news are reported every day. If this is the people of Dostoevsky and Tchaikovsky, what did Tchaikovsky and Dostoevsky were useful for? Where should we find the roots of such a situation? So we need to say, first of all, that our government is certainly trying to work on the state propaganda, and the state propaganda insists on the idea that the Western collective world is trying to boycott the Russian culture. So again, this would simply confirm that the whole world, has hatred against Russia and just want to isolate Russia. And propaganda emphasizes that there is a blatant campaign against Russia. And then I'd like to mention a couple of topics that maybe should not be debated on this occasion. There is a radical estrangement of Russian language and culture in Ukraine. And Russian language and culture has been phased out from school CVs and syllabuses. And I think that there's nothing more to say about that. The second thing I want to say has to do with the cancellation of cultural events or contracts with actors, artists, musicians from Russia that somehow are strictly related to the state, and they are considered as representatives of a state that has sparked off a war. That may surprise, but recently the director of Hermitage, Mikhail Petrovsky, a person who has always enjoyed a very good reputation, he designated an exhibition with Hermitage exhibits as a special cultural operation. So giving up such exhibitions and exhibits is reasonable, because we're not talking about Russian culture, but we are talking about political games, and the political power in Russia should not consider Russian culture as a tool, as an asset of them, and not as a part of the arsenal, because Russian power has never brought anything good to free Russian culture. So what has been done to Russian culture and its most important representatives is one of the most terrible crimes ever perpetrated by the Communist Party, and Memorial is dealing with this in particular. The current political elite is somehow following these steps and still fights against free culture. So these somehow damages Russian language and Russian culture all over the world. Now I'd like to make a more general remark. I do think that Russian culture is the last thing that could be blamed for what is happening, because this operation is carried out with people who have nothing to do with Russian culture and other humanist cultures. We talk about people who are against humanism and therefore against Russia. How is it so that so many people speaking Russians are detached from what should be the world praise of Russia? And how is it so that they do not know anything but legends about presumed military victories? Well, I think that maybe the questions should be considered differently. So culture is not a result of creativity, but is also the result of an educational system and of a set of social and family cultures, at least in the post-Sovietic contemporary Russia. And I see here one of the sources of this catastrophe, even though it's not the only one. And I'm not talking about Dostoevsky, because propaganda supporters of the war, not only they have not read the journal of a writer of Dostoevsky, and not even idiot, and I do not even looking for reasons in Brodsky verses. So the root causes need to be found somewhere else. They need to be found in a system that was set up inside society, inside the families, and that was created by the Soviet power. So actually, the establishment seemed to have collapsed, but it hadn't. So the Russian intelligentsia talks about the sensitization and awareness raising that is not possible because of censorship. I can make an example. So people can be arrested on the street simply because they are there with a sign in their hands with one of the 10 Commandments written on them. And so they're arrested just for things like that. Yesterday, an MP from Moscow was accused because he somehow handed out a prayer wrote by Pope Francis devoted to Mariupol. Let's move on to the other part of the question asked by Giovanna that is quite peculiar. So could we find an us that can identify both Russians and Ukrainians. Well, this us used to exist, and I was part of that. I have many, many friends and collaborators from Ukraine. We set up projects together. And what is most interesting is that we felt like being people and nothing but people. Not Ukrainians, not Russians. We just felt as people sharing a common vision of the world and of human beings. And as to this us, I am convinced that this us won't be totally destroyed. Currently, the debate is led in state and national terms. So I do not see any room now for this us. And probably a long time will have to pass before that is possible. So I think that this us won't exist as long as the war will go on. Thank you, Olga. Thank you very much, because your presence is not just a bridge at level of nations or of state, but it is about you, a place, a person, making us understand that in each situation, the passion for the person is always a great source of hope. Certainly something that is hard to get rid of. And anywhere in Russia, in Ukraine, but also here in Italy, we all desperately need to hope. But let's now get to Natal'ja Davtjan, our fourth host. She's a psychotherapist. She's in charge of the EMOS Association that is active in Kharkiv, and she deals with young people in trouble, orphans, and this association does a lot of work. And since the beginning of the war, they also had to flee, and now they keep working in Italy, from Italy, and they somehow try to keep following and supporting the people they take care of. So my question for her is the following. Well, the Russian regime probably thought that Ukraine would have been an easy mission, probably a sort of blitz war with the army being welcomed with flowers and thanks. Instead, the so-called human factor changed everything. So this resistance, this unity of the people, this wish for freedom and unity, and that is why these people keep existing. And again, the regime was not expecting such a reaction, and probably even in Ukraine, for many people, that marked a new beginning. That was a huge discovery in spite of the tragic events. And so the devastated Ukraine, resisting, fighting for its freedom, has become a symbol for all of us. So my question for Natal'ja is the following. So what do you see? I mean, how do your fellow citizens live? What are they experiencing? And what do you wish your people, in particular, beyond peace, a real and decent peace, everything we wish for, not just at the meeting, but all over the place.
Я приветствую всех сегодня.
Good afternoon, everyone. To begin with, I would like to announce that I will not read the text that I had prepared, because things in my country change every day, and obviously this influences what I wanted to say here. First of all, I must say that it's really, really hard for me to be here today, because some of my friends really condemn me for being here next to some Russian people. And for me, it is really, really complicated for me to be here, because I didn't want to inflict further pain. And some of my friends believe that it is a bit too early, and my son too believes that it is too early to share the same stage with people coming from Russia, as if I were betraying the pain that has been going on for 6 months and that is still on. I am not here to build bridges that Giovanna mentioned, at least not now, because right now it is not possible to build these bridges and with people that come from the aggressive country, because the aggressor uses those bridges to deliver its own ideology that envisages acquiring and destroying all the world, even the world where you live, because we have all turned into victims of these bridges. Interesting and people of talent, of genius, people that work in fine arts, in science, in politics. There's so many people we can mention, people working on television everywhere. All these people conquered our minds. They conquered our hearts with their works, with their genius, with their talent, with their charisma. However, then the war started, and part of these people preferred to remain silent and kneeled before the regimes. Another part, in fact, does propaganda in favor of the war, and only a very small part is against the war. And these people are so little that it is hard to hear them. It's almost impossible to hear their voices. And what is worse is that the regime uses works of dead artists for their own propaganda without having the right to do so. Then there are people that protest publicly and openly against the war, but at the same time they do lobby work in the interest of Putin. So for all this, through all these bridges, there is Putin, and Putin can go through all these bridges. I too love Russian culture. And right now I cannot exclude my life, as Dostoevsky would say, and I cannot ignore the beautiful culture, Russian culture, that I learned to love since I was a child. However, today it is not the time. It is not yet the time to do so until all those issues that Sedakova mentioned can be resolved. What I heard from Olga, her words, I feel those words very close to me when she mentioned the encounter between human beings. And we, in fact, met in Kharkiv when, with Franco Nembrini, you organized a conference about the Divine Comedy by Dante. We met at a university that now got destroyed by the bombs of Russian Federation. Many of the young people that are here today are volunteers in the meeting, and some of them spent their university life in that very university. Diana, that we met before, couldn't complete her degree program on time. And so that is why now I believe that at the moment there is not a chance to have an us joining Ukrainian and Russian people that was mentioned by Olga before. At least this is my view. My country has been crucifixed as Jesus Christ, and it is crucifixed every day. The day when Russia would have hit civil population was known. Yesterday, for example, a train was hit, and many people died, according to the data that we obtained yesterday. I know that you are informed, that you read the news, and sometimes what we read is that Europe has had enough with this war. But today I'm here to talk about a memory that has to be not only rebuilt, but which is of course important, the memory of those people. But today there is something that is happening to people who are alive, and that these people are suffering so much. So I have the feeling that we focus on memory, but we're not talking about what should be done to end this war. I come from Kharkiv, and my city has been bombed every day, 183 days. There's no day without bomb shelling in my city. And there is no day when people have not died in my city. So I want to bring here some reality, and to do so I would like to mention the story of a friend of mine who arrived here by car. He drove 90 hours going through Russia and the Caucasus. And along the way, he could only see hatred and violence and brutality. So for the moment, this us is not possible. I am sorry. Just taking a look at my notes because I don't want to leave out anything, any of the points I wanted to mention. So I was saying that at the moment, this us cannot exist for a simple reason, because Russia, for now, did not say sorry.
Напомнить последние минуты Христа перед тем, как он спускался в ад. Он был...
I'd like to refer to the last minutes of the life of Jesus. He was crucified with two more people, and with the two bandits, and only one of them felt sorry. I'm not optimistic about the repentment of Russia. If you visited the exhibition organized by Memorial, you could see that all the stories that were presented there, there's all the victims of the regime, and all the archives, and this big work that was done with the people here on the stage with me. Well, you've seen all this. However, all this work did not avoid that Russia would once again slip into absolute hatred, and we see once again all the betrayal, the murders and violence perpetrating again and again. So if I had to just focus on memory, this wouldn't work, because we've done all this and this didn't work. What else should we do to avoid war? Otherwise, we will continue to be in this vicious cycle, and we will get back to the same point. Now, going back to Giovanna's question, what were the changes that have occurred in the Ukrainian people during this war? So not from the 24th of February, but from 2012, from the beginning of this war, the Ukrainian people rebuilt their nation, rebuilt their identity. And the more Putin tries to destroy it, the greater our resistance will be, the resistance of each and every one of us, my friends and colleagues and clients that were born in Ukraine. From an ethnical point of view, are Ukrainian, Jewish, Armenian, Georgian, Polish, Russian, Tatarian, and so on and so forth. And we talk about mixed blood, and Stalin did this to destroy us. But after 2014, especially after the 24th of February this year, in my country, there are only Ukrainians. There's just Ukrainians, and all together we understood what makes us different from the majority of the nations in the world, and what makes us different. And the fundamental things for Ukrainian people is to let them understand why they are different from the Russian, because propaganda keeps saying that we are one and only people. But for us, a life without liberty is unbearable. We cannot wait for freedom. We cannot live hoping and believing in it. You can only exist in the condition, under the condition of liberty. And that's what Putin did not foresee.
Путин не предвидел именно это.
Putin did not foresee this, and now he can't understand it yet, because his regime and he have always been slave of money, slave of imperialism, slave of their own regime, of terror, of death. They are slaves themselves, and so they educated slaves. They try to educate slaves.
Они не могут.
They can't understand how to have an impact on free people. They can terrify their population easily, but they can't frighten us. Putin bombs us more and more, and he can't see that our resistance keeps growing. He didn't believe in the US, he didn't believe in Europe, but as soon as the war started, thousands of men and women went to enroll in the army, and our president didn't hide in a shelter. Everybody was ready to sacrifice their life, but not their liberty, not their freedom. So the question that was raised to the world is, what is more important, freedom or life? And life without freedom can be really considered life, not for Ukraine.
Grazie Natal'ja.
Thank you, Natal'ja. Thank you, Natal'ja. We have not so much time left. I would like just to have a very quick answer from our participants. Elena Zhemkova is going to go back to Russia in a couple of days. So why are you going back to Russia? With what hope? Well, I've mentioned that already. I believe that the people need our organization, they need our work. I believe that understanding the past is linked to what is happening today. And as long as people need to go back to Russia, I will get back to Russia, and Memorial will continue its work.
Una brevissima.
A very brief question also to Irina Scerbakova. Can education make sense? Can we say that everything has been useless? It's a very difficult question. It's very difficult after what Natal'ja has said. What can I say? Well, I can say this. Despite everything, despite the fact that the government in Russia has been taken as a hostage, has been kidnapped by people that are ready to do anything. We saw how protesters in the streets are beaten up, even young people, and people are put in prison even when they are very young and underage just for saying some things. Well, it is true that these people are a minority at the moment, and this regime could not be stopped and got very well equipped with arms and weapons, and it is clear that it is threatening all the world. This is true for sure, and this moment now is not the time to talk about bridges, but for sure I know from Memorial that there are many, many people in Russia that do what they can. Maybe the people in Kherson can't see it now, but I know that since the war started, thousands of people have been condemned for protesting against the war. They have been arrested. Ol'ga Sedakova mentioned that. So Millions of Russians, millions of Ukrainians are now in Russia, and they need help. And I know that every day there are people that try to give help in different ways, try to collect money for them and try to bring them to other countries. So I understand this is very little considering what is happening. However, I agree with Ol'ga that now all the debates are not so important. But I believe that it is fundamental that every single day the people that think like us try to do something to support Ukraine and to let Ukraine win. I don't know what the future will be like. At the moment, we don't have other plans for the future. We have no idea when the war will end, but we all realize one thing. For Russia, this issue is fundamental. How and when will this war end? This is a fundamental question, an essential question for Russia. And I think Natal'ja is right in what she says. It is a common issue. It is something that concerns all of us. And by standing together, only by standing together will we be able to resolve the situation. Politicians always say that civil society is weak, but I think that the strength of the weak exists, and solidarity is the most important thing that can be mentioned about Ukraine. Thank you.
I had interrupted Natal'ja, who wanted to add something, please. I'd like to answer your question, Giovanna, what I wish for Ukraine. Well, I wish my country territorial, but most of all, spiritual freedom. Unfortunately, hatred is being compounded with pain and suffering. Many people lost dear ones, went through dramatic and tragic situations. They also suffered violence, and I must confess that these generate hatred, and then people get caught in this vicious circle and are not able to get rid of such hatred. I'm grateful to the meeting for organizing events to talk about forgiveness. It's important to forgive in order to get rid of all the suffering and pain and evil that we have inside. Maybe it's too early to say this, but we will need hugs. Tanya, who works for our organization, she's one of the girls working for Emmaus. Emmaus takes care of orphans and disabled young people. Tanya told me recently that she was able to forgive the murderer of her mother, but only after joining Emmaus. And we have somehow tried to fill Tanya with love. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ol'ga,
Ol'ga, I don't know if you want to add anything. I would like to end this conference with you. It was not an easy conversation. You could get that. We went through such a deep pain, a daily tragedy. But maybe Ol'ga Sedakova can somehow help us. In one of her poems, she describes an angel on the Reims Cathedral that was heavily affected and destroyed by the World War, and this angel is missing a hand and it's all cracked. But I think that the message of this angel comes from the fallen, from the families watching their dear ones die, those women being humiliated, being raped. But all of that pain resulted in hope. And after 18 years in lager, Natal'ja Ginsburg says that I was able to make it through, because in spite of those 18 years, I don't know why, but I was able to hold on. And maybe all that pain and suffering was a way to get to that good that in spite of all is present in the world, and that in spite of all, let us be everyday people. I would like to end with this text by Ol'ga Sedakova, the words that the angel addresses to each one of us in order to emphasize the hope that we have in this good. And if we're here, we know that good. And that good will be the flower of hope. And the angel says, in this rosy, crumbling stone, raising my arm splintered by the World War, let me nevertheless remind you, are you ready to plague, to famine, to earthquake, to fire, to the incursion of enemies, to the wrath that comes upon us? Things that we see and witness every day. The angel says, sure, it's all important, but that's not what I want to talk to you about. This is not what I have a duty to remind you of. That is not why I was sent. I say to you, are you ready to unbelievable happiness? And last but not least, I want to thank our guests who shared their experiences with us. And I would also like to thank the meeting making such encounters possible, having done that for 43 years. And the Persons in Spite of All exhibition will go on tour. And that is why it is so important that each one of us, because of this unbelievable happiness, can contribute to this great thing that gathers here all together today here. Thank you.
La civiltà dell'amore fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Perché l'aspettavano così?
Perché credo in quello che dico.
Questo e basta?
Sì.
Don Giussani ha generato un popolo e io faccio parte di questo popolo.
L'avvenimento in cui Dio entra nella nostra esistenza e tutti, colpiti da una curiosità, sospendono per un istante l'ora e guardano dalla parte da cui viene il grido.
Perché l'aspettavano così?
Perché credo in quello che dico.
Questo e basta?
Sì.
Don Giussani ha generato un popolo e io faccio parte di questo popolo.
L'avvenimento in cui Dio entra nella nostra esistenza e tutti, colpiti da una curiosità, sospendono per un istante l'ora e guardano dalla parte da cui viene il grido.